Yeah, welcome, Zach. It's a pleasure to have you here. For those that don't know you, I think at this moment in the Elixir community, you're probably more well known as the creator of Ash. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Ash and or about how you got into Elixir in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Um, yeah, so I've been working on Ash now for it's like it's 5 years. Is how long that project's been going on. So we're getting into. It's funny. We're still considered kind of a young framework. But yeah, I got started with Elixir maybe 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, which is pretty cool because the language itself is not that much older than that. There's only a few people who I guess have a longer track record with Elixir. Um, and I mean, I fell in love with the language kind of immediately. When I got started with it, I was working with Python, and I've told this story before, so I won't go like super into the details of it. But basically, we had this service that was very unreliable and would crash nonstop. And uh, we realized we needed something else, and we ended up choosing Elixir primarily because of it had really good Postgres support with Ecto. We liked what we saw there, and in general, its selling point was reliability, right? Uptime, and we were trying to replace a service that was notoriously constantly crashing. So, um, and the thing that's crazy is I had never written a line of Elixir in my life. I read the getting started guides; they were good. I read about things like gen servers and how to handle failures and how to build your application. And so we turned this application into just a suite of like 10 or so importing gen servers. This was like an ETL app to migrate data from one place to another. And we had these like linked gen servers, and whenever one of them had a problem, like the other ones would crash too, and then they would rebuild everything from the beginning. And it was just such a good model. It worked. It just worked. Like the first try worked, and this thing almost never crashed. um, I don't think it ever did actually crash. We had cases where we had to go fix a bug, but the thing just kept running and kept doing like its best and would get most of the data imported, and then there would just be a couple things we had to go fix. Um, and I was in love from that point on, right? So for me, like the number one thing about Elixir as a software engineer is that I can sleep at night when I deploy my applications. Like I'm not thinking like, what if this thing, completely falls apart in the middle of the night? Like I don't get paged for my Elixir applications that are like everything is like that can wait till the morning because it's still running. There's just maybe we still ship bugs sometimes, but it's just yeah, to me that I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. Um, but yeah, so I moved around from a couple different companies working on Elixir, and I just sort of I got tired of rebuilding the same components like all the time, the same back end tooling that I needed everywhere I went. And it was wrong, but different. It was like wrong differently every time we did it. Pagination, building queries, and just generally sort of application design. So I think Phoenix is pretty hands off as a framework for how you actually design your application. That's all left up to you. Um, and so yeah, I wanted to build this thing like once and for all, so I could stop building it repeatedly. Um, and that's how I ended up building Ash. That was kind of the main problem statement. And it definitely turned into something a little bit more than I expected it to. Or it became, I would say, bigger than I thought it would. Um, but it's met and gone past my expectations
Yeah.
in that front. And now it's dovetailed into a whole community and a whole ecosystem, and we're working on things that one of my biggest priorities right now is actually making the Elixir ecosystem itself better, right? Like not just for people who use Ash, but just Elixir at large. And so that's where my work on Igniter is going. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. That's what I'm working on.
So in that respect, because AlchemyConf, as we haven't mentioned yet, but you're going to be one of the speakers at AlchemyConf, which I think will be pretty cool. But AlchemyConf, we try to be very much about the community. In this case, the Elixir community, and you mentioned the Elixir community there as well. So I was interested to know a little bit more about what you're doing, as you said, to try to promote the Elixir community? Like, is it to help developers? Is it to also, like, do you want to attract more people into the Elixir community? Do you think that's important?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think attracting more developers to the Elixir community is important for more than one reason, right? Like, there's the sort of sunshine and roses reason of like we want more people to, we want more people to have fun with the tech that we love, and we want to grow our community. But there's also like the practical reason that I think every Elixir engineer should be considering adoption important, which is that we want more jobs that match our skill set, right? Like we want our startups and our companies to be able to hire more people. We want more qualified candidates, right? So to me, I think those two reasons should get kind of everybody behind the idea that like if you believe in Elixir as a technology, you should be pushing for Elixir adoption and in general growing this community. It's not all just about like fun announcements of cool things. Like, we need all of those practical aspects. We need money coming in from organizations that are supporting the Elixir ecosystem. So yeah, you know, my head is very much in the how can we increase the adoption of Elixir in general. And I think that, Ash is actually a part of that. Like, I personally believe that, um, like, this isn't something that Phoenix is doing wrong, right? But I do think that Phoenix having a hands-off opinion about how you build and structure your application itself, right, can make it difficult for new people to get into the ecosystem, right? Which is we know that this is true. The Elixir ecosystem is predominantly senior engineers, predominantly people that are very skilled at doing a certain kind of work. Um, and so a lot of the idea with Ash is that like we can commoditize a lot of this stuff. We can make a lot of these things that can be quite difficult much easier, provide patterns and all these tools for people. And so I think that's one way that we can increase Elixir adoption. And then the other one is with Igniter, which is what I'm actually going to be speaking about or primarily speaking about at AlchemyConf, which is essentially like making it easier to bring in new Elixir elements into your application, making it easier to start from scratch and just incrementally install the pieces that you need. And I think that like when you're looking at somebody evaluating a new language or a new ecosystem or tool, the first 30 minutes are more important than anything. Like they are, right. And so I think a lot of what I'm focusing on with Igniter is like reducing the decisions you have to make up front. Everything can be installed later, right? So just start small, like, get something out that, get something to play with, and then you can just sort of start building on top of that. So those are the two things that I'm trying to do to work on Elixir adoption. And I do think that for me, that's one of the top priorities.
And on that vein, so as you mentioned, we need more people writing Elixir. We need also more company adoption because that will definitely be a big driver for more jobs, more everything. Uh, if you were talking to someone that's starting a company now and are looking at options, what would you tell them in order to either like how would you tell them to choose Elixir? Is that because of what reasons? You mentioned at the beginning like the Python crashing, and now you tried Elixir. Is that where you go with it, or anything different?
Yeah, I mean there are a myriad of reasons why I would suggest to an enterprise business to choose Elixir, at small scale or large scale. Um, but I do think that like there are a few big things that should be kind of our main talking points because they are truly attractive to the business person, right? One of the biggest ones is significantly lower costs, both of building applications and of actually running applications, right? So Elixir is an extremely resource efficient language, right? Like maybe not every little, tiny micro operation will be as fast as if you wrote something in a low level language and you like really, you optimized it and made it perfect. But Elixir itself is just it's so easy to write code that is going to write applications that are going to efficiently use all of the resources given to them. And this is documented. This isn't just like an opinion, right? We have numerous case studies with hard numbers showing like the massive cost reduction that you get when you use something like Elixir, and the patterns that Elixir gives you, allows you to use over something like Ruby, for example. So I think that's like talking point number one: massively lower cost. And in reality, I think for most business people, that's the like we say you can have the same thing, right? Like not really, because our apps are going to be more reliable. Our apps are going to be, I think, more understandable, more maintainable. But just ignore all of that and say it's all the same thing, but it's 10% of the price.
Yeah.
It's an easy evaluation. So yeah,
And probably a little bit harder question: would you tell them to use Ash to start with?
almost certainly. I mean, I think like we have a lot of people who are building really ambitious things in Ash. We have people working with large teams with Ash. Some of them are us, like some of them are my company, Alembic. Um, and so, yeah, I really don't have any problems recommending it to people, especially people who are building larger, more ambitious applications. Right? I think there's a lot of people who want to go build like a little toy, and to them, Ash seems kind of like overkill. Like they have to learn all this stuff in order to write like a tic tac toe game or something if they're just trying to play with Ash. But the real thing is like it shines in a larger system where the consistency benefits come into play, where the code reuse benefits come into play. So a lot of our tools kind of work that way, where it's like I didn't build them to make toys, and so it's might not be like it's probably easier to write a toy using, I don't know, a simpler tool. But yeah, I really would recommend that people are using Ash. The main thing is like depending on what you're doing, I mean, you might only use Ash for some certain parts of your application, right? Like Ash itself is more like it's close to like what an ORM does. Like it is not an ORM, but it just kind of fits in that like how do we manage changes to our domain? So something, we need to sign up a new user, like Ash will be like managing that. But often you'll have other subsystems, right? So if you're building like a day trading app, like the thing to like kick off a day trade isn't going to be like an Ash action, because like they do all sorts of validations and all this sort of stuff. You need something way lower level. So you might have like plenty of other Elixir subsystems or non-Ash components, et cetera. So, but for the things that make sense.
Cool. So now you're going back to community. You're very involved in the open source community of Elixir, at least. You speak at a lot of conferences. I was wondering why, basically, what led you to contribute as much as you do now, and is it, yeah, just why? What was the reasoning?
Um, I mean, realistically, the reason is Jose Valim. I think like it's kind of silly, maybe, or I don't know, like it's a little bit of a silly way to phrase this, but like I don't personally have a lot of like heroes. Like I don't know. I have really high standards, I guess, or like I don't know. But for me, um, when I first became part of the Elixir community, I saw that the leadership of the community, specifically Jose, especially back then, right? Like there was the community was much smaller when I first started with Elixir. We had folks like Jose and Chris McCord. I mean, there's a lot more, and I don't want to try to list names because I'll leave somebody out. But um, what I saw was just some like a leadership that kind of led from the front, that was putting in work, and they weren't just like a corporate overlord funding a project with millions of dollars of bankroll or anything like that. They were people who believed there was a better way and were willing to put in the sweat equity to make that true for more than just themselves, right? For the better of everybody around them. And Jose is one of my only role models because he just was so kind to the people around him. He was patient with everybody that he dealt with, and he always answered any like negativity with positivity. Maybe he would, somebody would say, "Oh, I hate this" or whatever, and he'd go like he would fix the docs. Like he even though you could tell that person was kind of being unreasonable, he would try to meet them somewhere that they were and make things better. And that I was like, that's how I want to be. Like, so a lot of like the way that I try to behave in the open source community is like directly just being inspired by seeing how Jose behaves in the community. And that's how any community works. It's always representative of its leadership. It's not representative of what its leadership wants things to be like. It's representative of what its leadership actually is like. And so I think that's what makes the ecosystem so fun to be a part of, and so wholesome of a place. So yeah, I just want to do my part contributing to that.
Yeah. And if let's say there's someone new to the community or just open source in general that wants to get started with open source, or you can make it specific to Ash, what advice would you give them?
um, I think there are two main things you have to do at the same time if you really want to be successful in an open source community like this. Um, you have to be willing, like you have to go first, like you have to put in the work. It's like everybody in the open source ecosystem, even people who are like paid to do this partially, right? They're volunteers most of the time. And so you cannot show up to somebody's project with the expectations of getting like somebody's time. So a lot of times what happens is you come to a new project and you're like, I want to do this. And you're like, you expect that somebody will teach you how, or like give you the tools to do this thing. It just doesn't work that way. They probably don't have the time. And even if they do have the time, if they had the time, they would probably just do it themselves. So like the initiative has to come from the other people because we're all volunteers. And then at the same time, you have to understand patience. Like people come and go from the Elixir ecosystem or just open source in general. People have life events happening, right? And so if you want something to move faster, the only person that's going to make it move faster is you. And you have to be patient with the people around you, have to have compassion for the people around you. Otherwise, like that's the first way to get yourself like kind of alienated from the people around you is like, oh, hello, you haven't answered me. I asked you this question yesterday and or all these things, right? It just doesn't work that way. So I think the two answers are putting in the work yourself and be patient. So yeah, you have to find the initiative to find what to work on, when to work on, what is valuable, right? Nobody's going to do that for you. And you have to be patient.
So yeah, on the flip side of that, do you think as project owners of open source projects, there's anything you can do to alleviate a little bit of the pressure or onus you're putting on someone new coming in?
Yes, there are definitely things you can do. And some projects are easier to contribute to than others, right? So I think Ash, for example, because it's like 15 different packages that all kind of work together in certain ways, right? Like it can actually really raise the bar for contributions to a specific type of thing, right? So we often see like somebody can contribute to like one of the sort of packages that uses the core. So like Ash GraphQL for building a GraphQL, right? It's much easier to contribute there than it is to contribute to the core stuff because everything that affects everything. And, there's very few people, I guess maybe even nobody that really has all of that in their head of like how this all works together. But I do think like, we tag things as good first issues is a great thing to do, right? Like tag things that would be a good choice for somebody to do first. And just, you know, do be like Jose, like be nice to people and patient with people coming into your ecosystem. I think is number one. Like be positive with them, even if like there's a lot of times that people will come in and accidentally waste your time, right? Like they don't mean to, but they're not at a level maybe that they could contribute to the thing they want to contribute to, and you spend time explaining something to them, and you that time is effectively lost. Um, but you just have to have infinite patience with those people. And if you do that, then people will feel comfortable contributing.
Nice. So, as a broader look at the Elixir itself, obviously, like Elixir core hasn't changed that much in the last few years, but there's stuff happening. Elixir types is a big one, like the type system. Where do you see Elixir going as a language in the next like 5 years?
Um, it's a good
Or,
question. I actually,
or
if you,
sorry, I can change the question if you want. It's like, where would you like it, Elixir, to go?
yeah, it's interesting. The only reason it's an interesting question because I am giving a talk at a different conference that uh, that has not been announced that maybe touch on this sort of thing. So I'll see some folks in Sweden for that one. Um, Ultimately, I think that the language itself, and Jose has talked about this, right? The language itself is decentralized. It's designed that people can build their own visions as packages, deploy them on Hex, and people can adopt or not adopt them, right? And so for a lot of people, Phoenix is there are more Phoenix programmers than they are Elixir programmers in a way. They've chosen Phoenix, and Phoenix is built with Elixir, right? So the Elixir language itself is kind of a different question than the Elixir ecosystem. But I think the Elixir language is very consistently made a march, like a slow but steady march on just better developer experience. Right. So the language itself does pretty much everything we need it to do. And anything it doesn't do doesn't really need to be added to the language itself. Um, it can be built as packages like Flame. Chris McCord built Flame. It's like this whole serverless, awesome piece of tech, and needed nothing really new in Elixir to make it happen. Um, so I think that's really just 5 years from now. What we're going to see is we're going to see significantly better developer experience. We're going to see better compile time verification of our programs, better documentation, just all of that, like those little things, like whatever the opposite of a paper cut is, those little joys, right? Where the language makes you feel like safe and protected and all that sort of thing. I think that's where things will be in 5 years. It'll be just tons more of that.
I see. So you mentioned like Phoenix as like an example of things that you have like Phoenix developers. Do you think they'll have Ash developers at some point? Will that be a thing?
I mean, I think we have some already. Yeah, we have a couple of people. Like there are a lot of people who I think it's a little bit less all encompassing, in a way. Like I think in some ways Ash is like, I mean, it's more of the sort of thing you would be like an Ash developer than even Phoenix is, because Phoenix, with the exception of LiveView, let's just cut that out for a second. Phoenix is a well tastefully crafted thin tool, right? Like it's got all these really powerful things, but it kind of gets out of your way in terms of like how you actually build your application. So Ash in itself is very chunky. We have like tons of all of these things that have opinions about how everything works together, and they kind of fit together like a building block. So I think you can learn Phoenix in a couple weeks, and Ash is like a much longer process to understand and to build things with, which is just the nature of the beast. So we do have people that are like say actively like I wouldn't build another application without using Ash. A lot of times many of those people are people who said before trying Ash, they were like, I would never use something like Ash. And then they tried it and they're like, okay, I get it now. I wouldn't want to build something without it. So with that said, I don't think it's really the healthy mindset, right? Like your mindset should be to be an Elixir programmer, and you should use the right tool for the job. Sometimes that's Ash, like many times that's Ash, but plenty of times it's not. And one of the biggest mistakes we see in engineering is like, you know, treating everything like a hammer or everything like a nail, or whatever the phrase is, right? To try to reuse your existing tools when something else would fit. But yeah, we definitely do have Ash developers today.
Got it. Just to wrap up this talk about like the Elixir community and Elixir language itself, I would just like to get your opinion on. Obviously, Elixir is still a niche. I think we can all agree to that. Why? Like, how do you see Elixir growing more, or what's holding Elixir back at this point?
This is a good question. Ultimately, like the world is different today than it was when Rails blew up. You know what I mean? Elixir, like Rails at the time, was like 50x better than any other way that you could build an app. And for a lot of folks, it made something like previously completely inaccessible accessible. And I think that Elixir and Phoenix are far more than an incremental improvement on Rails. But like the developer today has way more options than they did back then. And a lot of those options are well crafted. They're a good experience. I've made my choice of tools because I think ours are significantly better, but it would be a lie to say like, you can't do this with Rails. Like you can probably figure out how to do whatever it is you're trying to do with Rails or with uh, Laravel or Django, or you can probably figure it out. Like, will it be as good? I don't know, but you could probably like, check check the box on your Jira ticket that you like did the thing. Um, so I think that's why. Like the why isn't that Elixir and Phoenix aren't better. It's that it's a different world than it was. There's a lot more options. Um, but I think that the way that we win in the long run um, is that Elixir has proven to be a very safe choice for companies for a lot of different reasons. And like through economic downturns, Elixir being cheaper, like we have active clients with my company who are choosing Elixir because they can't realistically afford the egregious spend of their previous stack. They're like investing money to rebuild to make something that they can operate for cheaper, right? So that's a great example of how the attributes of Elixir will carry it through, like in the long term. So I think it's one of those things where like we have to focus on those things that are attractive to business people if we want Elixir to achieve escape velocity and to like actually make a bigger dent on adoption. And so cost is one. Talking about team size is another one, right? Like two Elixir engineers can do more than 5 Ruby engineers or whatever. I'm not. That's just a marketing phrase. I'm not trying to insult any Ruby engineers, but
we'll clip this part and just leave it in.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, that's how we do it. Is it's money. Money is the reason any programming ecosystem succeeds. And so if you want to help Elixir get big, get rich. That's what you need to do. You need to build something on Elixir. You need to get filthy rich, and then you need to tell everybody, I got rich building stuff with Elixir. And then
take a picture of your car and
yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Elixir.
Yeah. Cool. So we already said and mentioned this, that you're speaking at AlchemyConf. You also are giving a workshop at AlchemyConf this year. So giving as much or as little away as you want, what can attendees expect from your talk and workshop?
Yeah, so this is actually my first time going to an Elixir conference and not speaking about Ash or declarative design, which was always basically just talking about Ash, right? Like there was just sort of like a different angle to talk about the same thing. But I think that Igniter is what I'm going to be talking about, which for those who don't know is it's a composable project installer and generator, or package installer and generator. And essentially what it is it's like if you had like a command to install a package that would also run that package's installer to modify your code base and then present you like, hey, here's how we install this. That's the important bit for most people. It actually does quite a bit more. We have quite a bit. It's a large suite of tools that can be used for things like upgrading packages or for refactoring your code base, etc. But the fancy bells and whistles bit is the package installer, and Ash uses it for all of our packages, which means you can just start with any regular Elixir application and you can just install Ash into it, and it will change your configuration to be ready to use Ash. It will modify your Ecto repos to work with Ash. It will do all these different things to your application. It'll set up aliases and add additional dependencies and all this awesome stuff that like would have been 20 minutes reading through a getting started guide before. And so that's really what I'm going to be focusing on is showcasing, like, especially because now, especially at the time of this talk, right? So Oban has a Igniter installer now. We have Igniter installers for all of our packages with Ash. So I'm going to use real examples to show like, wow, look how much work is being done on your behalf in these installers. And so that's really going to be like, look at what the new developer experience is and what our developer experience is for adopting new packages, and look at how well it works. Because honestly, that's the thing. It works really well. It's nice. Like I've said this before, but working on Ash has always kind of polarized people. Like there are some people who don't like building things with Ash, or I mean, most people haven't really done it, but there are some people who don't think that it's a good idea, and some people who think that it is a good idea, etc. Very polarizing. But Igniter, like everybody who uses it is like, oh yeah, of course, like this is obviously better than the alternative. So it's kind of nice. It's a nice feeling to work on something that everybody likes instead of the other way around.
Got it. And for the workshop,
Right, right. The workshop is about Ash, of course. So we've given this workshop a couple times now, or we evolve it over time. We keep it up to date, etc. But I actually the number one thing about this workshop is that I personally enjoy giving it. So I gave a training. The first training I ever gave was horrible. I hated it. I did a very bad job. I'm not going to lie. The first training, I was like so focused on information overload. I was like, but they need to know all these things, and like people's eyes were glazing over. It was just like it was crazy. So I said I was never going to do another training again after the first training that I gave. But Josh, who trains with me, he runs Alembic, and he got me to try again, and we reformulated it. And the truth is, it's fun now. It's interactive. The format of it is really nice, and we teach you how to use Ash effectively from scratch. But we have had a lot of people who, like, even in our last training, somebody had been using Ash in production for 2 years, and they wanted to sort of do a refresher of the basics, and they said they learned a lot as well. So I think it's really valuable for anybody who's interested in Ash or who is using Ash on a day-to-day basis. And it's fun. You get to write a lot of code. Like we kind of we just do a little bit of explanation, and then we give you labs, which you can work through and ask questions. And so it's not like a big lecture. It's very hands-on. You get to try things out, make mistakes, and you have experts in their room with you.
got it. So tickets for both AlchemyConf and your workshop are already on sale. Check them out at alchemyconf.com. There should be links somewhere. I'm gonna ask you. We're getting to the close of this little chat of us, but what are you most excited about AlchemyConf? I gotta ask.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm a hallway track person, and I think like, it's why I've never been a huge fan of like, personally, of like all like fully remote or digital conferences, that sort of thing. They have found ways to make those good, and I know that it can be really great if you can't physically be in that location. But for me, what I love about well, first off, I'm excited about AlchemyConf because it's new, right? This is the first time that it's running. I have a lot of confidence in the people that are running the conference, and so I think it's going to be a really great experience. But for me, it's just so many people that I don't have a chance to have those in-person conversations with because I live in the States, right? So like I'm going to be able to see so many people that I work with online, but actually, grab a beer, have like a physical face-to-face conversation, and so much inspiration comes from that process. A lot of the best ideas in the Elixir ecosystem happened as a result of the hallway track of conferences. So yeah, that's for me, that's the number one draw is like, I love watching the talks. I don't want to diminish the other people's talks, right? But the number one draw is just being able to get those people in a room and really get the
Perfect.
inspiration going.
Yep. That's honestly one of the reasons we haven't released the schedule yet, but we usually will give like 20 minutes minimum between talks. Just and one of the reasons we have like a one track conferences is to allow people to have like a shared experience and have time to like talk about that and get inspired by like talking to each other. Definitely a big part for us as well. So is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched on today?
Oh yes, yeah, we have an Ash book in beta. So if you're interested in Ash, it's the best way to learn it. We've just released a new chapter, the testing chapter. It's so far been very well received. People have enjoyed reading it. We haven't really had any negative feedback. Like we've had small things to fix because it's in beta. But yeah, I was like, we were both kind of, Rebecca is my co-author. She's done most of the work, and we were both like waiting for like, oh, people are gonna be like want refunds or they're gonna hate it. We don't know. Like, but yeah, it's been really great how well that's been received. So, if you're interested, check out the book. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Zach, again, thanks for taking the time to do this, and I'll see you in Braga.
Sounds good. See you there.